There was only one thing I could say about the war in Vietnam. Well, there's only one thing I could say about the war in Vietnam.
So I just read Catcher in the Rye, and I also just watched Forrest Gump, and they were both pretty good. But they're also both set in the 20th century, so I thought it would be pretty cool if we just go through and look at the context that impacted both of these medias. One thing I should mention when talking about Catcher of the Rye, personally I think it's a bit boring if I just show you pictures of text, and they're pretty meaningless unless they're relevant to the context. So in places where I don't need to show you text, I'm just going to use clips of the Beatles, because who doesn't like the Beatles? J.D. Salinger, who was the author of Catcher in the Rye, had some personal history which impacted the way of the book. He was the son of a wealthy cheese importer and kept switching between prep schools before landing in a military academy in 1934, and he would eventually go on to fight in World War II. Around this time, he possessed an interest in creative writing, and then he eventually went on to publish his novel Catcher in the Rye, which basically made him incredibly famous. Another oddly weird thing that happens in Catcher in the Rye is the slang that the characters use. This slang was a product of the time, kind of like how we have our own current slang. This slang was used to connect to younger generations, and this way J.D. Salinger could discuss topics that he could really just be more open about, such as sexuality. I'll explore a bit more when we talk about Forrest Gump. Overall, I think it's very clear that J.D. Salinger's childhood affected the making of Catcher in the Rye and all its characters, and also the climate of America around the time also affected Catcher in the Rye and its characters. Here are some other details I picked up. One character, D.B., is an author and a war veteran who becomes a Hollywood screenwriter. One thing about J.D. Salinger is that he was an author and a war veteran, but he also wished to have a film adaptation of his work. The main character, Holden, switches between prep schools and is threatened with military school at one point in the book. Holden tries to go to a Cary Grant comedy. Cary Grant was a very famous actor in the 40s and 50s. But yeah, in terms of Catcher in the Rye, I might have missed something, but that's all I caught in terms of context. So I guess let's move on to Forrest Gump. Now, one thing to acknowledge about Forrest Gump is that, yes, it was originally a book, but in this analysis I'm going to focus on the movie adaptation that was released in 1994. Now, there are many cultural references in Forrest Gump, so I'm just going to list them through chronologically. The first one I noticed was Elvis Presley. Elvis Presley was, of course, a singer in the 1950s who performed rock and roll. The next one I noticed was segregation of the US schools. The film portrays the racist nature of students at the time, as there wasn't much racial equality back then, not that there is much now.
Well, raccoons trying to get on our back porch, Mama just chased them off with a broom.
Not raccoons, you idiot. And they want to go to school with us.
Sometime after this, Gump gets to meet John F. Kennedy, and sometime after this scene, we get his recruitment into the army, which in turn leads to his scenes in the Vietnam War. These scenes take up a big portion of the movie and are actually pretty good, and probably my favorite portion of the movie. Soon after this, he's given the Medal of Honor by President Lyndon Baines Johnson. Next in the film, we meet Abbie Hoffman, who is demonstrating an anti-war rally against the Vietnam War. Now, I'm going to be honest, I didn't know who Abbie Hoffman is, so to figure out who Abbie Hoffman is, I did the only logical thing and watched the trial of the Chicago 7, where from there I figured out who he was, and I figured out that he was the one who pretty much led the hippie lifestyle, which Forrest's girlfriend Jenny has been living. So this is a pretty crucial moment in the story, if you ask me. First, we see him participate in the Dick Cavett show, where he has an interview alongside John Lennon, where he indirectly influences the famous John Lennon song, Imagine.
People hardly got nothing at all.
No possessions?
And in China, they never go to church.
No religion, too?
Hard to imagine.
Well, it's easy if you try, Dick.
Next up, he meets Richard Nixon and accidentally exposes the Watergate scandal. Then, after starting his promised fruit business, he goes on to survive Hurricane Carmen, which destroys every other boat but his. He would then also go on to find Apple, which he mistakes for just some fruit company. Soon after this, we don't really get any type of historical context for a while. However, one thing to note is that Jenny does mention that she's sick with an unknown virus. This unknown virus was later confirmed to be AIDS. There are also other minor details that we see, like not physically, but Forrest mentions, or we can be alluded to. For instance, the assassinations of JFK, Robert F. Kennedy, and John Lennon are all mentioned by Forrest Gump. And additionally, we see the Black Panther Party active during the Abby Hoffman anti-war protests. This is also something I figured out from Titles Chicago 7. In terms of context of the author, or I guess in this case director that produced the film, there isn't really much, for the director, as Robert Zemeckis, who directed Forrest Gump, was just given the film as an option rather than him actually pursuing the film for a reason. In fact, in production of the movie actually removed some aspects from the book. In the book, Forrest has Savant syndrome, but in the movie, it does not actually mention this at all. Additionally, in the book, he has some time with NASA and cannibals. Well, obviously, a book and a film are very different pieces of media, so how do the two compare if you were to pit them against each other in a boxing ring? With a book, I think it's harder to portray something because, it's words. So you have to leave it to the imagination, really. And if the imagination doesn't really convey what the reader was intending, then it's kind of difficult. Well, with a film, they're kind of showing it straightforward so you can imagine what they say because the director is really showing you what they want. So between the two, I think that a film is definitely easier to understand than a book. But then if you have a lot of creative imagination, then you'd probably enjoy the book a lot. The advantage a film definitely has is that you can add extra stuff like visual effects and a soundtrack. For instance, Forrest Gump plays music based on which period of history the film is currently in. So I think that films definitely do have that advantage, but they don't have the creative liberty that a book can convey to its reader. After this extensive analysis of a book, a film, and two different examples of each, conclude that a film definitely has wider audience appeal and has a bit more liberty to its creation. However, it lacks the creative freedom that a book allows its reader to imagine. So that's the end of my video. I hope you enjoyed, and I'll see you another day.